The Roman Empire existed for an abnormally long time. Such longevity is rarely seen in large multi-ethnic empires. Rome, however, possessed one quality that set it apart from most other empires: an ability to adapt, change, and eventually overcome the most severe of crises. This was especially demonstrated in the 3rd century AD. Following the end of the Severan dynasty in 235, Rome would be engulfed in a prolonged period of instability. It seemed back then that all of the empire's problems had exploded at once. The authority and legitimacy of the emperor had declined, succession laws remained vague, and a series of ambitious military emperors would rise, only to fall almost immediately following their ascension. Roman generals would claim the imperial regalia with the slightest rise in their reputation, clashing in petty squabbles with the numerous other claimants who had done the exact same. All the while, the enemies of Rome were becoming stronger. The Germanic tribes, who now occupied the entirety of the northern frontier, were coalescing into ever-growing confederations of tribes. To the east, a new aggressive dynasty had consolidated control over Persia, the Sassanids, who, unlike their Parthian predecessors, were not interested in merely defending their border with Rome, but sought to expand it. Overstretched and vulnerable, the Eternal Empire would struggle to halt enemy invasions. Its long-distance trade would almost entirely diminish, making large cities and landowners increasingly independent, setting the conditions for an economic decentralization. The deadly Cyprian plague and a quote dry weather will further exhaust Rome. All of these problems brought the empire to its knees. The prosperous times of Pax Romana were a distant memory, and it seemed that the end was approaching the greatest civilization of antiquity. Rome, however, continued giving birth to competent men. Under the stable rule of the joint emperorship of Valerian and his son Gallienus, it seemed like the crises were finally about to calm down. However, this was the calm before the storm. In 260, Emperor Aurelian was crushed and captured by the Sassanid Persians near the walls of the city of Edessa, and would later die in their captivity. The burden of ruling alone proved too heavy for his son Gallienus. Seeing the inability of the central Roman authority to defend them, several border regions would secede. In the east, following some success against the Persians, a popular noble from the city of Palmyra, Odenates, would form his own kingdom based on the province of Syria. While he continued to formally acknowledge Gallienus as his superior, in truth, Odenates ruled completely independently from Rome. In the west, after crushing the Germanic Utungi, a Roman general of partial Germanic descent named Posthumus would claim the title of Roman Emperor, gaining recognition from the provinces of Gaul, Hispania and Britannia. Gallienus now controlled a mere 1/2 of the empire. He would try to restore control over the west on 2 occasions, but will fail in all his attempts. This tragic emperor would eventually fall victim to a conspiracy and be assassinated in 268. What followed this murder is the ascension of 2 of the most militarily competent emperors in Roman history, Claudius II and Aurelian, both believed to have played a part in the plot against Gallienus. Claudius II would only reign for 2 years until he contracted the Cyprian plague and died in 270. However, he would accomplish much during his brief rule. He would crush a Gothic army in the Balkans near the city of Nisus, earning himself the nickname of Gothicus. Claudius would then turn his attention to the usurper Posthumus in the west, who had been recently experiencing an economic downfall. Marching his armies through the western provinces, Claudius would re-establish Roman control over Hispania and southern Gaul. As mentioned prior, Claudius would not enjoy a long reign. He would pass out in 270 and be succeeded by his old friend and cavalry commander, Aurelian. A man from humble Balkan origins that would come to be known as Restitutor Orbis, Restorer of the World. Following the assassination of the brother of Claudius, who attempted to claim the imperial throne for himself, Aurelian assumed sole power. The Balkan emperor would prove his worth immediately following his ascension. He would crush a Vandal invasion in the province of Pannonia, only to be met with a bigger challenge. Aurelian had to march his army to northern Italy, where a massive Alemanni force was heading southwards. The exhausted Roman army would fall victim to an Alemanni ambush, following which the Germanic hordes will advance further in Italy, reaching as far as a couple of 100 miles far from Rome. Now, the barbarians threatened the capital itself. The resilient Aurelian, however, was not one to give up easily, and would eventually pursue, crush and chase the Germanic army outside of the Roman border. Witnessing the vulnerability of the empire's heart, Aurelian would spend much resources in fortifying Italian cities, constructing the Aurelian walls in Rome, most of which still stand to this day. Aurelian could now finally turn his attention to the secessionist Palmyran Empire in the east. Just before the ascension of Aurelian, the king of Palmyra had been assassinated and was succeeded by his underage son and his wife, Queen Zenobia. She had expanded her control over Central Anatolia and Egypt, while the previous emperor Claudius II was busy dealing with the western usurper Posthumus. In 272, Aurelian would march his legions through Anatolia, subduing the region without spilling any blood by offering peaceful surrender. In Syria, the Roman emperor successfully dealt with two large enemy armies. His campaign will culminate with the capture of Palmyra and its queen Zenobia. Only a year later, however, the captured city will rise in revolt once again, but would be swiftly captured for a second time thanks to the speedy march of Aurelian's army. And thus, only 3 years into his reign, the Balkan Emperor had reunified all eastern provinces with the empire, while simultaneously crushing multiple barbarian invasions. However, to the north lay another challenge for Aurelian. In 269, very much in fashion at the time, the founder of the Gallic Empire, Posthumus, had been murdered by his own soldiers. Following a series of short-reigning emperors, a governor by the name of Tetricus would eventually assume power over the secessionist north. In 274, Aurelian would invade the Usurpes' territory and meet him and his Gallic armies near Chalons during the winter. Fearing to meet Aurelian in open battle because of his renowned skills on the battlefield, Tetricus surrendered before the two armies even clashed. He would be spared by the merciful Aurelian and even become a senator in Rome. In only 4 years, Aurelian had reunified the Roman Empire and saved it from a demise that looked inevitable only a decade ago. He would then return in Rome and celebrate a triumph, but would have to leave the city only a year later, having to deal with more minor barbarian invasions. Following that, Aurelian prepared to cross into Asia, likely to launch an invasion against Persia. It is then that perhaps one of the most frustrating acts of treachery in Roman history took place. Aurelian would be murdered by his own high-ranking officers because of a forged document sentencing those men to death. A document that was created by a scheming bureaucrat who feared repercussions from Aurelian after previous crimes of his were uncovered. And thus, one of the most competent emperors in Roman history fell victim to traitors in his own ranks. For Rome was so great that it could only be destroyed from within. Following the murder of Aurelian in 275, Rome would be engulfed in another decade of succession crisis. The period of division experienced before Aurelian's ascension, while decentralizing the empire, showed that by dividing rule over the overstretched Roman state between several men, it could be defended more effectively. Something that became evident to Emperor Diocletian when he rose to the rank of emperor 9 years following Aurelian's death. This Roman statesman would continue Aurelian's work and would finally bring the crisis of the 3rd century to an end. But that is a story for another time. Special thanks to our patrons for making this video possible. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.